Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today, and thank you also for those joining us online. I'm Paul Scharre, an Executive Vice President and Director of Studies here at the Center for New American Security, and I'm very excited to welcome you all to today's event on artificial intelligence. We're at a remarkable time in artificial intelligence. We are seeing literal exponential growth. That term gets thrown around sometimes, but we don't just mean like things are happening. They're actually happening in a quantifiable, measurable way, growing exponentially in data, computing power, and algorithms, the key inputs into machine learning systems. And they're happening at a tremendous, tremendous pace. And so one of the challenges that policymakers face today is we need to not only understand this technology that's moving quickly, that's being rapidly developed, that even some of the brightest minds in industry leading AI don't fully understand the inner workings of how some of these systems work, but also anticipate risks before they emerge. And how do we prepare for those? We're seeing tremendous breakthroughs, and if just current trends persist, we're on track to see AI systems that are trained with 1 million times more effective computing power than today's state of the art by 2030. So how do we prepare for that future, for all of the opportunities that come with it, as well as potential risks that might emerge? There's obviously a lot of excitement about AI on both fronts, excitement and fear. And we've seen a range of risks that have been raised in the last year and a half in discussions about AI, anywhere from current harms that we're already seeing from existing AI systems like AI-enabled surveillance, for example, all the way up to existential risk, concerns that AI might imperil the survival of humanity itself. Now, one space of risk that has gotten quite a bit of attention has been this area of catastrophic risks, which is what the recent report by CNAS researchers Bill Drexel and Caleb Withers covers, and we're going to talk about today. Now, on one level, we know what catastrophes are. We've all lived through one recently, unfortunately, in the form of a global pandemic. But thankfully, they're rare, which makes them challenging to understand and to accurately prepare for, precisely because these are not day-to-day routine events. And concerns about AI and catastrophic risk raise a whole host of questions. So what do we mean when we say catastrophic risk? How does that differ from other types of risks like disasters or existential risk? What are the concerns specific about AI? What uniquely might AI do? And what are the ways in which AI systems, off here in some computer, could lead to some sort of large-scale harm in the real world? Now, a lot of this discussion in this space too often devolves into emotional appeals, either warnings of the dangers of AI without maybe much explanation of what those specific concerns are, or conversely, just dismissal of AI risks without seriously considering them. And that's why the new report by Bill and Caleb is so valuable. It provides sober, careful analysis of AI and catastrophic risk to help inform these discussions and inform the policymaking community. It could not come at a more important time. Policymakers around the world, not just here in Washington, but capitals everywhere, are weighing what to do about AI, how to govern this very important technology. Now, there's not going to be one AI governance solution. We'll need a multitude of solutions for a whole range of different problems. But better understanding catastrophic risk is on the agenda for policymakers. And this report and today's discussion with the esteemed panelists that we'll have joining us for this conversation is a very helpful step in advancing this conversation. So thank you all for joining us for today's event. I am pleased in a moment to turn things over to CNAS fellow Bill Drexel, who will give a brief, about 10-minute presentation on the report with Caleb, and then we'll turn to our panel of distinguished experts who's joined us today. So thank you all, and please join me in welcoming Bill.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for being here, both in person and online. Good to see so many familiar and unfamiliar faces. As Paul said, my name is Bill Drexel. I'm a fellow here at the Center for New American Security on the Tech and National Security team. We've just released this report just a few weeks ago, and I will give a brief overview, but I do really want to keep it brief because we have a really excellent panel ahead. But the intention of the report was basically to take a look broadly and to provide policymakers and decision makers with a general sense of what AI means for catastrophic risks of relevance to national security. There's a lot in the report. I think the best way to kind of give you a sense of where it goes with it is to just briefly touch on each of our 5 recommendations, and you can infer from that to a degree what's in the report. But if any of them strike you as crazy or bad ideas, all the better. Go and read the report. I highly recommend it in a totally self-serving way. So our first recommendation is basically that policymakers, journalists, technologists, etc., really need to be very deliberate in differentiating catastrophic risks from other forms of risks, especially existential risks. So a lot of the catalyst for this report was that anyone who's been watching the AI space since ChatGPT will notice that there's been a deluge of discussion about risks, and people have been throwing around big terms, big concerns in a lot of different directions, and using a lot of terms interchangeably, but to refer to different things. So I came to this report and to this job actually from working in humanitarian ops on AI, where we work on catastrophes, right? So that's kind of a strain of thought on risks that has collided with this AI safety idea of catastrophic risks and existential risks. So we, in the report, try to disentangle what do these two communities, the kind of crisis response community and the AI safety community, mean by these different terms, and how can we make them more precise and more useful to the general public and to the government. And the upshot really is that we just need to be more deliberate in focusing on these catastrophic risks as national security priorities that really we've been tracking for a long time. So it's cyber, it's biosecurity, it's financial security, it's these kind of bread and butter things that we've been watching for a long time, but which AI may impact in really dramatic ways. Second, we need to continue to assess and watch these risks holistically across a wide range of dimensions of risk. So a lot of the meat of our report goes into a typology of different contributing factors to catastrophic risks of relevance to national security practitioners. Those 4 kind of overarching categories that we give are new capabilities. So imagine an AI tool that can help develop biological weapons or chemical weapons, what have you. Technical challenges, so kind of the technical issues with the technology itself that can exacerbate risks in different domains. Integrating AI into complex systems, so ways that ecosystems around AI can respond to the introduction of automation or AI tools in ways that can kind of create particular hazards. And the last one is conditions of AI development. So there's been a lot of talk about competitive pressures, potentially leading corporations and governments, et cetera, to lower their standards on safety. But there are other conditions to be worried about. There are safety cultures. There are kind of a whole bunch of elements that we need to watch carefully. And it tends to be the case that a lot of the discourse focuses on 2 of these dimensions, but not the other 2. Historically, however, it's the case that usually when there are large-scale technologically related disasters, those disasters or catastrophes occur from a combination of factors coalescing. So we need to keep kind of this holistic understanding in mind. Our third recommendation is to support expanded testing and evaluation for frontier models. We've already taken some steps in this direction, but it remains to be, it's still the case that these frontier models, which are very powerful, still lack a lot of the tools that we would need to verify their safety if they're going to be applied in a lot of high impact domains. So that's just a need that is solvable that we need to work on. And continuing to fund those efforts, to focus on those efforts is important. Fourth, we need to plan for catastrophes abroad especially from China, that may impact the United States related to AI catastrophic risks. This is one of the kind of themes of the report that often gets missed, I think, in a lot of the other discourse around this topic, largely because, if you focus on the new capabilities or the technical issues, those are common to everyone developing AI. And so that garners a lot of attention. But when you do look at the conditions of AI development, there are a range of reasons why we should expect that the kind of tendency towards disasters, towards catastrophes from China, which is sprinting ahead to try to surpass the United States in AI development, that those risks are higher. And it so happens also that the set of large-scale risks that we're worried about from AI don't often respect national borders. So you may say, okay, maybe they are have a higher risk tolerance. What's that? That's not our problem, but it very well could become our problem. So we need to strengthen our defenses and keep an eye on that set of issues. And then finally, we need to continue to establish risk mitigation measures abroad where appropriate, as we have done already with our political declaration for the responsible military use of AI and autonomy, and also our kind of continuing proposing our stance for keeping AI out of nuclear command and control systems. But we need to make those things more and more implementable and clearer, but we also need to expand into new areas as the technology expands into new areas with potentially really dangerous outcomes. So that's more or less the kind of broad overview of our recommendations. If you want to get into anything in particular, again, I recommend the report. I'll just move now into welcoming our panelists to the 3 chairs nearest to me, if they could come on stage, and I'll introduce them and we'll move into a panel discussion, which I will moderate. I'll also be asking the first 2 questions, but please also start thinking of questions, and if you're online, we please make sure to ask your questions by using the hashtag CNAS 2024 or using the chat box at cnas.org/live. We will, so just to introduce our speakers, I'll start from left to right. So on our far left, we have Wyatt Hoffman. He's a foreign affairs officer in the Office of Emerging Security Challenges at the Department of State, which has been the State Department lead for the political declaration on responsible military use of AI and autonomy. Next to him, we have Alexandra Seymour, who is a former CNASer, and also currently the staff director at the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection at the House Committee on Homeland Security. And finally, we have Michael Kaiser, who is the Associate Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy Strategy and Analysis at the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Office in the Department of Homeland Security. And they have recently published their report on reducing risks on AI at the intersection of AI and chemical, bio, radiological, and nuclear risks. So we were joking in the green room that we have a pretty great spread of focus on weapons, cyber, and bio. So whatever catastrophe, whatever flavor you like, you may ask. But I will ask the first couple of questions, and to do so, I'll just move onto the stage with them. Great. So the first question is, how are your offices thinking about risks from AI generally, and how have your perceptions of those risks changed since the AI executive order came out last year? I don't know if we want to start nearest to me and head down.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Bill. And thank you, CNAS, for hosting us today. As Bill mentioned in his remarks just a moment ago, the DHS CWMD office was designated by the Secretary to be responsible for that CBRN AI report that we delivered to the President in April. I think since the fall when the EO was issued, we learned a lot about AI. A lot of government experts on CBRN now have become experts sort of by force in AI. But the AI sort of fervor in the fall, thinking about catastrophic risks, thinking about existential risks, to a certain extent has calmed down. And I think that's in part due to the CBRN and particularly bio experts getting involved in the conversation. One of the findings in our report, the very first finding, in fact, is about building consensus among these different communities, the national security community, public health, scientific, even food and agriculture communities, to understand what is the actual real level of risk based on scientific principles, as well as understanding the capabilities of adversaries to use biological agents in particular to conduct attacks against the homeland. And so I think if you look at our report, which is available on dhs.gov, you'll see that, in fact, that first finding is about building that type of consensus around the language we use. I'll end it there for now. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, CNAS. I would say it's good to be back, but you've moved offices, so I'm not really back, but back with the team. So I think from the congressional perspective, I think, and it's hard to talk for all of Congress. I think if you all have been tracking this space, there's a flurry of bills that have been out there. There's a flurry of initiatives. And the way that Congress works is that we're broken up by jurisdictions, and AI applies to every sector of the economy. There are equities within almost every single committee, so there have been lots of hearings, lots of different bill ideas. So I think that things have, I would say at least from my committee standpoint, the way that we are approaching it is pragmatically. I think the way that we're trying to think about it is we do have existing laws that are in place. Let's examine those. Let's see where the gaps are, where the needs are. Let's see where we need to identify the areas where the actual risks are that exist and where existing law does not cover those. So I think at the beginning, and I think a lot of this was spurred by ChatGPT, which is I think when there was just an explosion in interest in AI in general. There was first, I think to Michael's point, there was a lot of focus on some of the existential risks, a lot of it driven from just a lack of understanding about what exactly this technology does, knowing that we do use it in certain places already, but thinking about that potential going forward. And so I think Congress has taken a step back, and it is really trying to understand, like I said, where those gaps are, trying to understand certain applications, and to make sure that we really are thinking about like what the risks are. And I think on that end, another important question to ask is not just what are the risks, so that we can think about what legislative solutions look like if they are needed, or where we need to think about existing law, but also thinking about what are the risks that we are willing to accept. Because I think that there is this tension that we continue to think about as well, which is we don't want to stifle innovation. We don't want to move too quickly. We're imposing regulations that are going to affect the whole industry in a burdensome way. We want to be very precise about the definitions and the scope of how we're thinking about legislation so that we don't have any unintended consequences. And I think that part of that is understanding exactly where we are willing to accept those risks so that we can allow innovation to thrive and to operate as it does, and we can learn from the way that the technology progresses, and that we give it space for that to happen. So I think coming back to us, I think we are thinking about it pragmatically. I'll get into this a little bit more. I am Committee on Homeland Security, so there's a lot of things that the committee specifically is tackling. I think a lot of my focus specifically has been on the nexus with cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection, and I can get into some of those examples as we continue to speak, but just from a broad overview of how we're thinking about it.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, CNAS. I think it's great that we've got a sort of a cross-section here from the national security community, and coming from the State Department, we're obviously more focused on kind of the international security environment. And specifically in the Bureau of Arms Control, Deterrence, and Stability, our mission is focused on promoting stability, preventing conflict, and reducing the risk of unintended escalation. And so that's the perspective that we come at AI from. And from that perspective, the first thing I want to emphasize is that there are both risks and opportunities. And we shouldn't lose sight of the potential benefits, including to stability from AI in the military domain. And that may include increasing accuracy and precision in the use of force and providing better information to decision makers where that might help avoid unintended engagements and unintended escalation. But we are, of course, concerned by the potential for states to deploy AI capabilities in high consequence applications that result in unintended consequences, particularly in the military domain. And from that view, our perspective on the risk, while we have learned more about AI capabilities over the past year since the executive order, while we've certainly seen an evolution in the capabilities, and they've pointed to kind of new concerns, especially in the realm of sort of decision making, the core concerns remain actually pretty similar as we've encountered over the past few years, because they're not so much a function of the capabilities themselves and what they're capable of, but the approach that states are taking and the norms that are guiding their approaches to developing and deploying these capabilities in the military domain. And the approach that we've taken in the Arms Control Bureau is to try and build international consensus around a set of norms that will guide how states do that. And those norms are meant to be sort of future-proof in the sense that we may not be able to predict exactly how the capabilities are going to evolve in a year or 5 years, or what kinds of military applications they'll be used for. But there are certain things that we can say with confidence that if states do them, if states start to put in place certain processes and build certain technical capacities, then it's going to have an effect of reducing the risk of development and deployment of AI, regardless of what kinds of military applications we're talking about. And in sort of crafting what became the political declaration, this set of kind of 10 foundational measures, we had the benefit of drawing from our colleagues in the Department of Defense who've been working on these challenges for well over a decade, as Paula knows, being one of those people. And we worked very closely with our DoD colleagues to craft this set of practices that we have a lot of confidence in.
Great, thank you. And I just want to highlight on the last two responses, I do love this point, and I should have mentioned it myself. We do try to mention in the report that there is a big risk of over-emphasizing risks, and that's something we also have to be wary of. So thank you both for highlighting that as well. I accidentally preempted my second question, which was going to be, what do you spend which particular risk do you spend most of your time looking at? But I'll ask each of you to expand on that question in your particular domains.
Sure. Coming from DHS, we think mostly about terrorism risks, although the line between terrorism and potential clandestine state use is pretty blurry. Primarily, when it comes to AI, it's bio all the time. The dual-use capabilities of some of these AI models, especially biological design tools, to be able to advance the science across multiple domains, really presents some great promise, and things like cancer research, other types of research, understanding interactions in the human body, how proteins translate to function, but all of those things can be turned into dual-use applications, either by a state or non-state adversary. Going to something that Alexandra said just a moment ago, when it comes to regulation, perhaps the best idea is not to try to regulate necessarily AI, but instead to look at some of the regulatory regimes we have around the physical transition of what might be developed in an in silico AI environment. So things like our biosafety and biosecurity policies, things like potential new regulations, or understanding the risks posed by cloud laboratories and automation. Those are the types of things in the physical world where some of the sort of high-end bio risks that we've identified and sort of hypothesized might actually turn into something that could actually harm people.
Great, thank you.
Sure. So coming back to the two things that I mentioned earlier, cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection. So starting with cybersecurity, this is a big focus of my time on the committee as well. We actually had a hearing on this topic, well, broadly about artificial intelligence and ways that we can advance innovation, and looking at the specific different DHS applications of artificial intelligence to look at the use cases, understanding that we're investing in these technologies for a reason, and so we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's safe, secure, responsible, but also that we are reaping a lot of the benefits. So a big focus of the hearing that we had, and a big focus, at least for my subcommittee, was on the actual cybersecurity nexus. And there's two ends of this. There is, how do we make sure that artificial intelligence itself is secure? And that comes with physical infrastructure, thinking about cybersecurity around data centers, thinking about how we're securing the AI models, how we're thinking about our small businesses, our innovators who are coming up with really incredible new applications, technologies, but might be at risk of cybersecurity attacks. So I think that was one aspect that we were digging into and thinking about a lot of those best practices and making sure that as we continue to advance AI forward and we continue to adopt it, that it is cyber secure. And the other end of this, which I think was really promising and something we really teased out, is just how artificial intelligence can be used to advance cyber defense. I think this is an area that we have seen a lot of value because we've seen it in a number of different applications. We can use it for threat detection. We can use AI to fill in workforce gaps. This is a very big priority, I'll say, for Chairman Green, is looking at the cyber workforce gap that we have. It's over 500,000 individuals across the nation. We had a hearing on this topic as well, and I think that artificial intelligence is one of the areas that we're looking at to be able to fill at least some of these gaps. So I think we see a lot of promise there. And then moving actually into the critical infrastructure protection conversation, I think we really have been able to see, and looking for threat detection, it's been very valuable. For those who might be following this space a bit more, there's a lot more increased nation-state activity that we're finding within our critical infrastructure sectors. We're seeing it become a particular target for Chinese state actors. One in particular is called Bolt Typhoon. And one thing that we found that government officials have been raising the alarm about is how this threat actor has been burrowing into critical infrastructure sectors. And essentially what we call pre-positioning. So instead of their typical tactics where they might have injected malware or otherwise, and they do it particularly for espionage purposes where they're trying to gather information, they are now burrowing into existing infrastructure so that if they're in the event of an attack with or a crisis with Taiwan or otherwise, they are ready to go to launch an attack. So this has been very alarming to officials. And coming back to artificial intelligence, one of the promises that we've seen is that officials have said that it has been very helpful for helping them to detect some of these actors that have been burrowing in critical infrastructure sectors. So I round that out in saying that while we do need to be thinking a lot about the security aspects underpinning artificial intelligence as we continue to use it, some of these use cases for cyber defense that we have seen be very promising and that can fill critical gaps are just reinforcement for why the technology is so valuable and why we do have so many benefits with it. So those are two areas we've been digging into a lot.
Thank you.
So a lot of the discourse around AI risks tends to focus on malicious use. And there's often an assumption that the AI in question sort of works or even works too well. It's capable of things that weren't even designed for. That's certainly a concern, and there's certainly lots of my colleagues at State that are concerned about the proliferation aspects and potential malicious use. But the other thing that we've been thinking a lot about is what happens when states are using AI and it doesn't work as it's intended. So there's too much trust placed in systems where there isn't justified confidence in the reliability of the system, or whether states are deploying systems in a military context that, whether due to a flawed development and design process, or inadequate training of personnel, or reckless or irresponsible behavior in deployment, results in unintended consequences. So we've been focused a lot on those problems of the sort of unintentional failures or misplaced confidence in the reliability of AI capabilities. And from that view, a lot of what we're focused on with the political declaration are defining those practices that would actually have a tangible impact in reducing those risks. So one of the measures in the declaration is that states should ensure that AI capabilities have explicit, well-defined use cases and that they're designed and engineered to fulfill those intended functions. That may not sound like a radical AI safety proposal. It may sound like common sense to some, but this is really important to establish as a shared norm or international practice because So to give a very obvious example, if you're taking a system that's been designed and tested and validated for a desert environment, and you're deploying it in an urban environment, that system is not going to perform as it was intended to function. So there needs to be a process in place that ensures that the capabilities have well-defined use cases and that the development and testing and evaluation process are formed around testing against those use cases. Those are the kinds of conversations that we're having, and having that measure in the declaration then gives us a basis for a much more nuanced, sort of granular level discussion around the risks of AI with the other endorsing states that are part of this process. So we're really focused on how can we bring this discussion from the 30,000-foot level of AI risk to getting very specific about the kind of practices that need to be in place and what might go wrong if you're not engaging in those practices, and bringing into that discussion people from the testing and evaluation community, people who actually design and engineer systems that need to be part of those discussions in addition to the diplomats. The one final thing I'd say in terms of things we spend a lot of time on is the nexus between AI and nuclear weapons in particular, because this is obviously an area where the concerns about the use of AI in the military domain become kind of the most acute, especially in the context of nuclear command and control and communications. And the lack of transparency and the lack of a shared understanding of how many different countries are approaching AI use in the military domain is in itself a concern and can be destabilizing. So we are supportive of transparency and providing assurances, and that's why the United States has made a commitment, together with our allies France and the United Kingdom, to maintain human control and involvement for all actions critical to informing and executing sovereign decisions concerning nuclear weapons employment. Kind of a mouthful, but it's important to get the details right there. And we encourage other countries to make that similar commitment to establish that we should all be drawing this shared red line that says we're not going to go over that line of automating nuclear command and control. So at the same time as we're promoting transparency, and that transparency also includes the full range of policies that are all publicly available detailing the Department of Defense's approach to AI and autonomy. We're being transparent. We're also engaging countries in a very technical and very practical discussion around what AI risks are and how they manifest in the military domain.
Thank you. Great. Well, that's very illuminating on all counts. We're about to open to Q&A, so online or in person, please feel free to direct any question to any one of our speakers or to all of them. But I'll just say I am really heartened, to your point about it being a mouthful and a lot of details, that there are a lot of details. I mean, it seems like so many, all the kind of organs of our government are digging deep into the minutia of what these risks actually look like on the ground. And so I find that encouraging. I hope the audience does too. And yeah, it suggests that after kind of a large public discourse on grand sweeping ideas of risks, we're really getting into the details. So that is great. So I'll open it up. I see one hand there.
Thank you. Two-part question. First, for everybody, to Bill's earlier point about by 2030 that the compute that's going into these models will be 1,000,000% greater. In your respective areas, how do you think about that for scenario planning and trying to sort of see around the corner? And then secondly, maybe for Wyatt, but also anyone else, the term dual use gets thrown around a lot, but if these companies were ever actually declared dual use in a formal sense, they would have to lay off all their non-US persons, which ironically would probably spread knowledge of their techniques around the world and be very counterproductive. And so at the same time, that the trade-off that comes of calling something dual use can be a potential inhibitor to ever making that determination. And so do we need to rethink about how ITAR and some of these controls work, maybe having some sort of AI-specific tier for friendly countries to be able to work in these companies without letting the export go beyond that?
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll take the first part there. So right now we think that AI technologies lower the barriers for malicious actors to conduct WMD terrorist attacks. But again, like I said earlier, the transition from the digital to physical worlds is still very difficult. Looking ahead to 1 million times worth of computing power, the thing that I'm personally worried about is AI models as agents. So being able to not only fulfill the agent acquisition problem, but also work all the way through that process by potentially ordering materials from multiple different vendors to avoid any sort of scrutiny, that sort of thing. Nevertheless, in the short term, we do think that the inherent knowledge required to produce and weaponize a CBRN agent is still very, very difficult, and will continue to be difficult for a pretty long time. Handling hazardous materials, the danger to the actual person or people involved in the plot, those are pretty big barriers that no amount of AI is going to be able to overcome. But as we get to the next level of using multiple AIs, multiple systems that are able to interact with each other, it starts to, again, chip away at some of those barriers to entry.
Yeah, I'll just say, from thinking about it from a legislative perspective, I think this is one of the biggest challenges. I think you see in the executive order there was a computing threshold, and you see how Congress is very deliberative. We are thinking through different proposals, and if we were to set something like that, a specific threshold, it would be very hard to keep pace with the technology. So I think it comes back to something I mentioned earlier about definitions and how we want to scope the types of risks that we want to focus on, what measures are appropriate for those specific levels, but it has to be agile enough, because if we were to address compute head on, that could change very rapidly.
Yeah, I think actually both questions kind of point to the need to be very targeted and sort of deliberate in whatever sort of risk reduction measures we're pursuing. I think it's also useful to kind of, put things in historical, context. If we were having this discussion in 2012, we'd all be talking about AlexNet and image recognition and the latest advancements in deep learning. If we were having it in 2016, we'd be talking about AlphaGo and reinforcement learning and all that that's capable of, and what that might unlock. Who knows what we're going to be talking about next year? And I take the point about exponential growth and that that changes things in certain ways. But in many respects, the risks that we're focused on and concerned about are still the same. And certainly the cutting edge capabilities of foundation models raise, really difficult, complex questions, particularly in the realm of how those might impact decision making and how those might be used in a strategic decision making context. But we're very careful and to try and strike a balance between taking an approach that is still going to be relevant in the future, that's still going to be applicable in a year or 5 years, even as the technology evolves. So not moving too quickly, but also not moving too slowly. And that's the only really answer is that's very difficult, and we have to be very targeted about what risks we're trying to mitigate, what measures we're going to implement to address those risks.
Great. Yes, I see another question.
Alexandra, you'd mentioned cyber workforce gaps. And you'd also mentioned, I think it was the FBI or someone using defensive technologies cyber defensive technologies with AI to detect nation-state actors in some way, right? Or am I missing that?
I didn't name any specific. Okay. I just said in general.
In general. All right. I do know that AI-related cyber defensive technologies have been making some solid inroads, regardless of whether or not the U.S. government is using those. We'll leave that question mark out there. In the private sector. Now, my question is, first of all, in the private sector, how much are critical infrastructure owners and operators actually trying to think about the latest and greatest AI technologies to try and beef up their cyber defenses against these new threats from nation-state actors and of course, the standard players, all the other risks that we have out there? And if they're not adopting these things at place, what might be holding them back? Is there anything that public policy can do to help ensure that they are acting on these things? Because at the end of the day, if we can't just put all our eggs in the basket of the FBI or whomever might have really solid technologies to detect everything. The owners and operators do need to be stepping up in some way, and if there are these gaps, how do we deal with that?
Yeah, great question. Well, one thing I think directly from the AI executive order, the Department of Homeland Security through CISA was tasked to kind of evaluate how you can use AI safely and securely for critical guidance for critical infrastructure owners and operators. So that's out there. I think it is on their radar. It's very hard to say who is and who isn't, and I think it probably depends on the critical infrastructure sector. Some are more mature, some are a little more forward-leaning. But I think the biggest barrier for any of them, and honestly probably for any enterprise, is just going to be the cost that's associated with it, and just a lot of ambiguity around what the rules of the road are going to be. Because if they're going to make this investment cost up front, they want to make sure it's going to work right. They want to make sure that they're integrating it properly. I think there are still just inherent unknown questions about the evolution of the technology and how helpful it will be in the long run. I think there is a lot of just broad interest in it, but some are probably moving faster than others in actually adopting it.
Great. One more in person, and then I've got an online one next.
Hey, Bill, so one of your recommendations is about monitoring and addressing international catastrophic risks driven by AI. Perhaps that's easy in the context of working with partners and allies, but as you mentioned China in your opening. Do you think that effort to monitor and engage is enhanced by decoupling, made worse by decoupling, or it's a net neutral due to kind of those broader geopolitical dynamics?
Great question. And in fact, I'll roll in the online question because it's very relevant. Holly asks, could you talk more about the risks from China related to national security concerns? And will there be room for U.S.-China collaboration in the future? I think I'll get to this portion of it, but just to give a very brief overview of why China has outsized risks, I think there are three main factors. First, there's a huge amount of techno-optimism in China, particularly around AI. So they are the most optimistic nation on AI by some polls. We're near the bottom. And that's related to technology going along with their rise, but also state censorship of disasters, which makes it hard to develop a safety culture. Second, we have a really serious state-led sprint to pass the United States, and in the past when China has done technological state-led sprints, they've tended to end in tragedy in a whole bunch of different ways, the largest obviously being the Great Leap Forward, but there are a number of other incidents like their bid to join the satellite launch industry in the 90s and so on and so on. It always tends towards disaster. And the third and biggest is authoritarian crisis mismanagement culture. So we saw this with COVID, but we've seen it with a whole lot of things where there are all the incentives are towards cover-ups in the early stages of an emergency, which tends to make it snowball into a disaster, and then those incentives become stronger, which then tends to make it snowball into a catastrophe. For all those reasons, I'm concerned about AI in China. I think decoupling, I think it does both. I think it makes it better and worse. I think our export controls on chips actually are hurting them, and this means that they're going to have to the types of AI that they're going to pursue will be specific and hopefully more monitorable, and certain risks save some unexpected developments, which are certainly possible. We don't have to focus on as much other risks. It allows us basically to direct our focus more precisely. On the flip side, I think it doesn't help. A lot of this, like particularly that second factor of state-led sprints to pass up competitors, the decoupling I think really exacerbates that factor in their thinking and in their actions, and could mean that they're willing to stomach greater risks and go a little more unhinged than they already might be going. to the question of is there room for cooperation, it's been a bright spot of U.S. Sino-American relations at the moment, relatively speaking, of course. Whether it'll continue, I'm skeptical based on our kind of technological relationship with them on other high-risk domains, especially bio and so on. But I'd actually be really curious to hear what the panel thinks on that question in your respective domains. I understand in cyber it's probably pretty bleak, but go ahead.
I just leave it at that.
Yeah, okay. Sure. How are you feeling about bio with the, I mean, I guess DHS may not be directly involved in that, but to the extent you can speak to it.
No, I do think, as part of the report that we've referenced here a couple times, building the international culture of norms when it comes to AI and bio is important. Even if the People's Republic of China decided to go off in some different direction, it would be more difficult for them to do so if there was a set of norms in advance before they were able to take those steps.
Great. And Wyatt, I imagine you may have the best window into this question.
I don't know about that. I mean, I don't know if I can address the kind of, sit here as a sort of grand strategist and think about decoupling or not, but what I will say is we do think that there is room for cooperation. We've made it clear that we are open to dialogue with the PRC on military uses of AI, on responsible military use of AI and how to mitigate those risks. That's been made pretty publicly clear. Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks wrote an op-ed late last year that made that pretty clear. The National Security Advisor has made similar statements. So we've certainly demonstrated that we're willing to come to the table and talk about these specific risks. Again, I think it helps to be targeted and to figure out what risk are we talking about and what are we doing to address it. And there has been some discussion with China. So there was an interagency delegation that met in May in Geneva with PRC counterparts, an interministerial delegation, and at that there was a discussion about advanced AI risks, and the U.S. side did make clear, certain areas of concern. So I do think that there's a shared interest. I mean, a shared interest in addressing some of the risks to strategic stability, the risks of unintended engagements that we're focused on. So focusing on the part of the risk spectrum that my bureau tends to focus on, we see a need for dialogue and a need for coming around shared norms and commitments.
I will just add one thing, that I think that the China threat and the way that China is developing and using artificial intelligence has definitely been central to the conversation about any legislation, or just top of mind for a lot of members. And I think even has been central to this conversation about regulation, how much, when, where should we place it, because we don't want to fall behind China. And I think there are serious concerns about the way in which China has used and developed AI for surveillance purposes or otherwise, that I think does continue to keep that. Just knowing that alone has kept a lot of the AI conversation central.
Great, thank you. I see one in the back.
Question primarily for Bill. So there's a kind of decoupling both on safety culture and in terms of just AI research and development in general between the kind of Chinese and U.S. Academic communities, or Chinese and Western academic communities. For example, with the DeepSeek model, one of the top models in China, they criticized some Western benchmarks for having a morality component that was associated with Western values. And my question is related to this. What strategy for either decoupling or maybe undecoupling, unifying culture would you prefer for kind of addressing some of these cultural safety problems in China?
Great question. Yeah, it's an interesting hazard vector. Not exactly a catastrophic risk, but certainly a risk. I mean, China loves to criticize, Western-centric morality in a range of fora. I think that I don't give much credibility to those criticisms, and I think, if anything, to the extent that it reflects a concern over how AI systems could also be a vehicle for values, it just reflects that we need to be competitive, and in an ideal world, Chinese citizens would want to use our AIs, and that at least for LLMs and what have you, that their use of them wouldn't align to the CCP's moral system. I think it's maybe a good thing that there's a significant divergence there. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question entirely, but
there's a component here with safety or avoiding some of these risks as well, right? Where you might want Chinese developed models to share similar best practices with regards to preventing biological risks, for example. And in that sense, you want more agreement from the Chinese researchers on this. So at least that's possible. So do you think that is a goal, to get more agreement from Chinese researchers on this? And if so, like, what is the strategy for approaching it?
yes, okay, great. I think I did miss kind of maybe the meat of your question my first go around. I do hope that we have more technical collaboration with the Chinese on kind of strict technical safety issues, and in principle, there's no reason not to. And from what I understand, actually, the kind of safety consciousness of a lot of leading Chinese kind of AI technologists has been rising, particularly in the last year, so that's a promising sign. And industry collaboration may be our best vehicle to try to get safety practices into the PRC. At the same time, some safety tools, some safety methods, it can get a little dicey insofar as they may reveal some of our own secret sauce, so to speak. So that's also a concern. But yeah, to the extent that we can, I think it would be great to collaborate on safety with the Chinese, knowing also that there are a lot of areas where we can't collaborate or they won't want to collaborate, and so on. I'm seeing a reluctant hand.
Hi, my question is for Alexandra about the realistic prospect of legislation that actually affects the catastrophic risk that we've been talking about. There's been a lot in the news recently about just the Trump campaign's approach to regulation and on AI, and also other Republican candidates, and just given the forecast for the elections and things, I guess I'm curious about what you foresee as being possible or likely within this Congress, but also in potential future Congresses.
Yeah, I think that is a great question. It's the question of the hour. It's very hard to say, and I think one of the things you raise kind of points to that there are very divergent opinions on how to approach AI, if we need regulation at all, if we do, how much is necessary, where should we place it, understanding where existing laws are. I think that Congress has mostly been in information collecting mode since ChatGPT happened, and initially the reaction was, oh my goodness, we must do something, and so you saw kind of the flurry of initiatives and legislation, and I think that members are taking it seriously. They want to learn, they want to understand, and of course that's going to result in different opinions and different priorities. So whether we pass legislation, I really don't know. I think there are still some issues that are going to continue to be worked out. I think potentially, and this is just, I think that as Congress is recognizing that it needs to be scoped down a bit more and to focus on specific applications and use cases, and that you can't just paint a broad brush and say we will do something about artificial intelligence. There might be some opportunities, but what specifically those are, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Thank you. It looks like we're winding down on time a little bit. We might have time for one more question, and then I'll ask, unless there are none. Oh, we do. Okay, one more question, and then I'll ask Paul to close us out.
Just a question on the point on nuclear command and control that you mentioned about how the UK, France, and US have been comfortable putting a red line out there about human-in-the-loop capability while other nuclear nations have not. Do you think this reflects just a desire to be unpredictable from kind of our adversaries' perspective, or is there genuine curiosity on the other side of bringing AI into nuclear command and control from their perspective? Down the road, I guess.
It's difficult to speculate about, you know, the motivations or strategies of other countries. I mean, you know, I would say that, right, we have kind of an established pattern of transparency, and we have, you know, we're very clear that we, you know, about the value of transparency and why we make these kinds of statements. You know, that commitment was included in a document that was about, you know, responsible practices for nuclear weapon states. So I think there's, you know, I would caution not to read too much into it, and there are many different not mutually exclusive explanations for why certain statements have or have not been made, and I think that there's room for to find common ground on that kind of commitment.
Thank you. Well, it looks like we were just about at time, so I'll invite Paul up to close us out here. But thank you again to all our panelists, and over to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Bill. First of all, join me in giving a round of applause for our panelists. Well, thank you very much, Wyatt, Alexandra, and Michael, for your remarks in this discussion. And thank you especially for the hard work that you all are doing with your colleagues in your respective offices. This is, as we've been hearing, just a really thorny problem. We're seeing the technology move very fast, trying to be agile and flexible and leave space to respond to these challenges, whatever they are, as they emerge, is a tough one. And I'm glad that we've got folks like you all working on this inside government. And thank you all for joining us today in person and online. And I want to thank, again, Bill and Caleb. Caleb, can you give a little wave of your hand here? Caleb, also a co-author in this report, Caleb Withers. Thank you, Caleb. And please stay tuned for more from our team and our researchers on this and other topics. Thanks for joining us today.